Why I love this topic so much is because it relates to everyone who is doing anything, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an employee, whether you're in the C-suite, whether you are the suite. We all have times in our life, and sometimes every day, where our inner critic, when I was in school, they called it your gremlins. They're talking to you. They're saying things to you and about you that are not true. And so we all have those experiences, and some of us don't like to be public about it, but we are bringing this to the table because we need to talk about it. We need to understand it. We need to have strategies and tactics to address it in the moment as well as long term. So let's roll up our sleeves, take notes, let's get into it. I am passing the mic to Keisha so that she can introduce herself. And you guys know I like to start this off with a hot, juicy, yummy tip rather. So Keisha, I'm passing it to you so you can give us that tip.
Thank you, Dr. Lynette. I'm so excited to be here. So my name is Keisha. I am the founder of Winter Rich Enterprises, and I've spent over 20 years working in corporate with and in corporations to help them create inclusive cultures where all talent thrives regardless of their background. I have an experience and background in human resources, leadership training, development, and consulting. And my hot tip that I want to share with you today it's actually a perspective, and I'll dive more into it in my talk today. That is, you don't have to change who you are in order to be successful. Actually, the opposite is important. You have to embrace who you are, learn to leverage your difference as a differentiator in order to thrive professionally in your business as well as in life. Handing over to you, Lynette.
Well, that's a great way for us to get started with this conversation. I love that, because changing who we are and pretending to be something else and wearing a mask of success when behind closed doors things are a hot mess. Like, there's so much going on right now that showing up, we hear people say all the time, be you, show up authentically. And I just want to ask Keisha, like, what does that, just that alone, what does that really mean? Because sometimes we have several hats. Which authentic us are we showing up as?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because here's the thing. I think a lot of us spend so much time trying, if you're a business owner, if you work in the professional space, you're always trying to research, what are the steps? What are the 3 steps to success? What are the 7 principles that I have to master? What are all these things that I have to do in order to be successful? And I say become more of your authentic self. First of all, identifying what your differentiators are, right? When we spend so much time trying to be something or trying to apply the formula, a lot of times we lose sight of really what we bring to the table. So what does it mean, right? I work with a lot of people that were still working corporations, and there is an ideal of what the perfect leader or the perfect person that has high potential sounds like and looks like. But for me, it means that if you're an introvert, you don't have to become an extrovert. All you have to do is identify the unique differentiators that you have as an introvert and learn how to leverage that to your strength. It also means if you have a traditional feminine leadership style, right, you don't have to act like a man, right? Or vice versa. Understand what it is that makes you powerful and good at what you do and leverage that. The third thing for people with multicultural background is if you have a diverse cultural background, you don't have to assimilate, you don't have to cover, you don't have to hide your cultural heritage in order to thrive. actually, that's going to give you additional perspective that people you are working with, working for, don't have. And those things can allow you to be more successful. So lean into, maybe even do the work. If you haven't discovered the things that make you unique, first of all, identify what those things are, leverage it, lean into it, and capitalize on it. That's what I mean when I say that.
Lean in. I love it. Lean into who you are. And I appreciate that you also included the multicultural background, because there are so many people who have changed who they are, have hidden their culture. I remember talking to someone who said they spent decades removing and practicing removing their accent from their speaking voice so that people would not know they weren't from the United States. And I thought that was so sad to hear, because it's almost like losing an entire part of who you are. And so, Keisha, when you hear me talk about losing who you are and doing so to fit in or to get a promotion or to get a client, what comes up for you?
Well, first of all, I totally identify with that scenario. I think now the idea of being of a different background, a different culture, it's probably a lot more accepted than it was when I was coming up in the 90s. And I remember specifically being told by family members, right? I'm originally from Jamaica, and I lived in California, and I remember specifically being told, like, you want to reduce your accent, you want to blend in, you don't want to stick out too much. And so really spending a lot of time trying to downplay that difference. And it was, definitely, even for me, a challenge. And this was when I was a teenager before I entered the workforce. And I remember coming on the East Coast, which had a lot more Jamaicans. And I came back to Connecticut to be with my family, another part of my family. And I remember one of my siblings was just like, why do you sound like you're a Yankee? And the idea was that you work so hard to cover that you're actually losing a part of your cultural heritage. And so for me, that story really resonates, because I had to, when I was younger, really go through that journey and recognizing that this actually makes me unique, and it's not something to play down or play small and to hide. But, in those days, and I think it's resurfacing again, is if you are from a different background, if you're an immigrant, if you're a multicultural, that is not the standard way to be. And actually, that's not the way to be in order to be successful. And so you have to conform to what this fake, form of success is, rather than really being proud of who you are, embracing your background, and stepping into that authenticity. And, by me doing this, yes, I come from an English-speaking background, but when I worked in corporate, I would work with a lot of leaders that came from other countries where they didn't speak English as a first language. And so they had the additional burden in their own standpoint. It's like, well, I'm not going to be effective because English is not my native language. And I'm like, listen, your English is perfectly fine. So all those things, actually, I know we're going to get to start to talk about the inner critic and self-doubt, but all those little things, when you're trying to hide and cover part of who you are, it begins to feed this feeling of not being enough, not being good enough to be in the room, not belonging. And it causes you to shrink and not to step up and own your power in the corporate workplaces. So that's what I would say about that.
I love that also, because you brought in a perfect segue to the inner critic. Because when I think about the conversation today, I see two sides of this, Keisha. One is the external information that we're being fed, whether it's in our upbringing, whether it's in the media, There's information that we are taking in from the outside, and then there's the information that we have living inside of us that we're talking about being termed as the inner critic. In my mind, though, the inner critic, we weren't born with that, were we? You know, it seems to me that the inner critic came from external sources. So I'd love to know more from you. What is the inner critic, and where do you believe it came from before we start talking about how it's affecting us?
Yes, the inner critic, first of all, in general terms, is really this nagging, shaming, criticizing voice that shows up when you're trying to step outside of your comfort zone and when you're trying to play big. And so it's really a result of fear. And that fear is because you're doing something new. And so I like to reframe it. Instead of saying that the inner critic or fear is even something to be avoided, actually have a mindset shift to say, hey, this is happening because I'm not resting on my laurels, because I am pushing the edges of what I normally do. So when you, for example, if you are a speaker and you get on stage for the very first time to give your very first keynote, you may be nervous as heck because it's something you've never done. Or if you're working in a corporation and the first time you present to a senior leadership team or a board of directors, I was just speaking about this, you may be scared and shaking. Why? Because it's something that you've never done before. So I say normalize and destigmatize what's happening. It's literally your brain going into fight or fight response mode. It's a neurological, psychological reaction to what you perceive as a threat. And it comes up because of a perceived fear of failure, perceived rejection, perceived, you're maybe even afraid of criticism. And so because of all these fears, your body goes into this fight or flight response mode. And then in your head, you start telling yourself things like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm going to fail, just all the different things. But the very first thing that I say is know why it's happening. It's because you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. And even though it doesn't feel good, celebrate it, because it means growth is about to happen. Learning is about to happen. Transformation is about to happen. And so celebrate yourself, because most people live their lives in their comfort zone. And you know what they say about what dreams do in comfort zone? Dreams go to die in the comfort zone. And so it's not something to be avoided. Now, how do we manage it? Do we need to manage it, right, effectively in order to continue our trajectory towards success? Absolutely. But basically it shows up because our body goes into fight or flight response, because we're doing something new, and eventually if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to develop the competence and eventually develop confidence, so we won't be afraid anymore. I'll give you one analogy before I turn back to you, Lynette. Think about something simple that most of us, or many of us, can relate to anyway, right? When you are a teenager or an early adult and you have no idea how to drive a car, the first time you jump into a car and you start driving, you are nervous. You're nervous that you're going to get in an accident. You're nervous you're going to scratch the car. You're nervous that you're not going to be able to learn how to drive safely. But guess what? 20 years later, you're not nervous about that anymore. Actually, it becomes such second nature to you that you're not even focusing on driving. I don't know if you've experienced this yourself, that you just get in your car, you're going to the office, and all of a sudden you left your home, and all of a sudden you reach to the office, and you don't even realize how quickly it happened, because now it's at the DNA level. You build so much neuroplasticity, which is a thing that happens in your brain that you do it over and over again. You build such familiarity with it that you don't even have to consciously think about driving anymore. But the first time you learn to drive, you have to think about changing the gears, how to parallel park, how to reverse, doing all the things. But when you do it for 20 years, it becomes second nature. So you're not going into fear. And so I tell people all the time, it's just that you don't have enough reps yet, but as long as you keep doing the thing, eventually that fear, that inner critic will go away.
Thank you, Keisha. Let me take a moment to thank the people that are in the room with us. We appreciate you for coming in and sharing some of your time with us today. Dr. Stacy and Mohammed and Daphne and Queenie and Binta and Michelle and Sean and, Ife or Ife, we are going to learn how to say your name. Absolutely. Please inbox me how to phonetically say your name, because you have been here a couple of times and I want to make sure that when I greet you the next time, I am greeting you correctly. And so I appreciate everyone who has come to share some time with us. And I want to talk about something you said, which is the reps, because that pertains to everything. It's like when you first get on a bicycle, or when you do anything new, it's uncomfortable. It's not necessarily done to your standard or to your liking. And I know so many people, though, who won't do the reps. They realize, oh, look at that. Ife. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm so excited about being able to pronounce people's name correctly. It's a big deal to me. And so the people who are listening and who prefer to, perfectionists tend to be in this category. I'm a recovering perfectionist. We want to get it right and as soon as possible. Keisha, when you talk about those reps, do you have some suggestions on helping people who don't do the reps? And a lot of times it's from fear. It's not really that they just don't want to. They're afraid to fail, so they don't do the reps so that they can actually get better at managing that self-talk, the inner critic.
Yeah, just first of all, be gentle and be kind with yourself. That's the first thing. Don't be harsh with yourself. I think we live in a very harsh world, and this is how we actually begin to shift from the inner critic, right? You grow, depending on the family or the teachers you had in school, because of how many of us were spoken to growing up, now people may not continue to say to you, it's just like, well, like you need to step up, like if you're a guy, man up, or stop being a wuss, or all these hard things that many of us may have experienced. Even if it wasn't at the hands of your parents, it could be your friends, could be a family member, it could be a teacher, and we talk to ourselves in such harsh ways that we would never talk to people that we love. So it is, first of all, recognizing that fear is normal. Normalize, that's the number one thing I say. Normalize and destigmatize the feeling, because it's your body actually doing what it normally does. It's a neurological, psychological response to fear. So don't overreact to it. Understand this is normal. Everybody goes through it. I do an exercise when I do my keynotes is I put some bubbles that says I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, my accent is too thick, I'm too young, I'm too old. These are all the messages of the inner critic. And I tell people, raise your hands and let me know if you've ever told yourself any of these things. Because these are all the things the voice of the inner critic can tell you. And without fail, I have almost 100% of the room, sometimes 100% of the room with their hands up. And it's always interesting because it's people of all backgrounds, male, female, black, white, Asian, Latino. Everybody has their hands up. People that are junior in the organization, senior in the organization. And I say, you see how normal that is? Stop beating yourself up about it. And now, because if you're beating up yourself consistently about it and shaming yourself, that is not a powerful place from which to begin to take action. And then the second thing in order to go into the action mode is realizing that all you have to do is to take the first small step. You don't have, like, so for example, if we were using the speaking analogy, right? If you're a person that's much more introverted, or you're shy, you don't like to speak up in, meetings, but the action is that you do need to be more vocal and present your ideology with conviction and influence. If you go in thinking that you have to sway the entire room when you don't usually ever say anything, that is too high of a standard to put for yourself. You have to start with the baby steps and build on it. And so maybe in that first meeting the first time you ever speak up, maybe the first time you do that, you just ask a question. And the purpose of asking the question is actually just hear your voice in a room of people saying something. You do that a couple of times, and okay, now that I've heard my voice a few times, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare a couple talking points before I go to the sessions, and I'm going to say one or two. It's like, well, my perspective is this. I agree with this. And then maybe the next session, then you give a dissenting opinion. All right, well, I know that's what you said, but this is my perspective, and this is why it's different from your standpoint. And now you begin to develop your communication and your influencing skills in those sessions, but you can't start big. You have to start small. Otherwise, it becomes overwhelming, it becomes too much, and you begin to feel overwhelmed and frozen. So I say this to people all the time, action is the antidote to despair, but the actions, if you want to build momentum, has to be small. Small and consistent action is what's going to build the momentum to keep you in action, or to get you in action, I should say, and then to keep you there.
I love that. While you were talking, I was envisioning being in a meeting and having an opinion, especially an opinion that is going against the grain of the conversation, and not speaking up about your opinion because the voice in your head is so much louder than what's going on around you. And when it comes to the inner critic can really, really affect your professional success. If you're an entrepreneur, it can affect your business success. Have you seen that happen to people? Have they reached a point where they could not conquer that inner critic and it damaged their success level?
Yeah, definitely see it. And the worst part about it is it's when you don't see it. Because yes, we've seen it. I've seen people not step up professionally, not take the big assignments. Opportunities come to them and they shrink away from them. It's like, I don't think I can do this. This is too hard. And then somebody else that takes that risk, even though it was scary for them, they get the visibility, they get seen, and then they get the opportunity, right? That fear can cause you to shrink away from taking opportunities on. And so I've seen that, but I think the worst part is the opportunities that you lose, that you don't see because you don't put yourself out there, right? How many dreams do we have in our hearts? Maybe, it's writing a book. I just wrote a book. And in your heart, it's like, I want to write a book, but maybe I'm too scared to put my story out there. I want to start a YouTube channel if I'm a business owner. I want to start a blog, but I'm afraid of stepping into that spotlight. So I actually hold myself. It's one thing when external forces hold you back, and we're going to talk about that, but it's a whole other thing when we hold ourselves back because of the self-doubt and fear. So for me, it's not so much that you are feeling fearful, because that is normal. The damage is done when we allow ourselves to be paralyzed and not get into action because of that fear. And so for a couple of things that I'll say around that is that we have to understand how to turn that inner critic into that inner coach. And what is the difference? I'm going to give you 3 differences between the inner critic and the inner coach. Number 1 difference is the inner critic sees you as fragile, needing to be protected, and if you fall down, you can't get back up again. Whereas somebody that's coaching you, like, think about it, like, it's a perfect example if you have a child that's learning to walk, right? The child is taking one step that first time and after another, but they're going to be wobbly, they're going to fall, but you see them as like, you know what, you can do this, and you're encouraging, like, you can do this, I see you as capable, I see you're resourceful, and even if you fall, you're going to get back up again. I'm going to help you get back up again. So that's the difference between the inner critic and the inner coach, right? The other thing is that inner critic uses shame to hold you back from stepping up and stepping into your purpose. But the inner coach is aligning you to purpose and to mission. So it's not using shame, it's actually holding you as someone who's going to be resourceful and using your purpose and your mission in life as a resource and a source of inspiration to drive you along. And then the third piece, the inner critic has a fixed mindset and is focused on avoiding failure, versus inner coach, when you learn to activate it, has more of a growth mindset that Carol Dweck talks about in her book, that allows you to take risks because you're learning. Even if you fail, right? There's an expression that says there is no failure, there's only winning or learning. So the growth mindset is, even if you don't succeed in doing the thing, it's okay because you've learned what didn't work, and you're going to use that as information for the next thing that you're going to be doing, and eventually you'll get succeed. But that persistence and that resilience is important in order to consistently stay in action. So I know I said a lot, Dr. Lynette.
No, that was amazing, because those are all of the things that are probably going on in our head, but in the negative as opposed to in the positive. And so reframing that makes it so much easier to address the inner critic with the positivity of what we're hearing, right? And so I love the examples and the specificity of what you just shared. And I'm wondering, what are some strategies that we can use to coach ourselves? And you know, I love when you give examples. So if you have some more examples that we can, you know, literally walk away with today and start applying when the inner critic shows up, I would love to hear some strategies and some examples if you have those too.
Yeah. I'm going to give you an example in a minute, but I already gave you one strategy before, is to normalize and destigmatize this feeling, knowing that whenever you step outside of your comfort zone, whenever you're trying to do something new, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It means learning and growing is happening. And so it's not a reason to shrink back, it's a reason to be in continuous action, so that you can develop competency over time, and eventually that competency will be transmuted into confidence, because now you have the evidence that, hey, I worked through this area that was difficult and very scary for me, and because I kept repeating my reps, I think of a tennis player or any athlete like Serena Williams. Like, the first time she went on the court, she wasn't bold and dominant as a child, but after decades of mastering her craft, you know, she became an unstoppable force, and she was confident in me. Now, as a woman, a lot of people didn't like the confidence, and we could have a whole conversation around the backlash that you can get sometimes from being too confident. But she didn't have any doubt about her ability, because she built up evidence over time, because she put in the work, she put the reps in, and she became a master of her craft. I think a lot of times, a lot of us stay in this feeling of doubt and fear because we don't put the reps in, we don't build the evidence, and so we're always consistently doubting ourselves and our capability. So for me, the first thing you've got to do is normalize and destigmatize that it's okay to feel it when you just start, but it's just a phase, because over time, you're going to develop the competency if you stick to it. So one example for me, and we can use it as we go along, is that when I worked in corporate, the first time I had an interview with a C-suite leader that was not in human resources, because my background was in human resources, and from the beginning of my career, I was always exposed to senior leaders in HR. But I was interviewing for a role in an organization, and I thought I was just going to interview with all the HR people, because I'm confident. I know how to convince the HR people about my competency and my skill set. But what I didn't know is that the CEO of the organization, it was a rather big organization, wanted to meet with me, and I went in total panic mode in my head, because it was uncomfortable for me. I had never interviewed with a C-suite leader or even had a one-on-one conversation with a C-suite leader outside of HR before. And so the interview felt high stakes to me. I walked in. This man, I thought to myself, first of all, he's sitting between this and the biggest career jump I've ever had in my life. And so I just thought to myself, he's going to find out that I'm a fraud, right? That imposter syndrome. He's going to find out that I don't know what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah, you can fool the HR people and how great you're going to be. But he's going to see right through you, that you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not ready for this job, you don't have enough experience. He's going to see right through it. And I was so preoccupied with this internal dialogue in my mind that I didn't realize he asked me a question. So I eventually came out of my head and back into the room, and all he said was, tell me about yourself. Pretty simple question, right? A basic interview question that I had actually practiced. But at that moment when I opened my mouth to speak, my mouth was completely dry, and no words was coming out of my mouth, right? So I had really worked myself up into this fear because of all the things I was telling myself. And at that point, when you asked me the question, all I know is that I was literally frozen at that point in time. And then to top it all off, not only did that happen, but I started to have a muscle contraction. I don't know if I had low potassium or it was just a reaction to fear in my hamstring, that I thought to myself, oh my God, do not cry. So eventually he realized what was going on, and he said, are you okay? You want me to get you a glass of water? I nodded my head. And while he was getting the glass of water, I had to recompose myself. And I said to myself, okay, all right. This is clearly not going well so far. However, what I'm going to use is as an opportunity to learn. I've never interviewed with this level in an organization before. And even if I don't get this job, what I'm going to use this as an opportunity to learn, to help me prepare for the next time I go for a position at this level. And so I shifted. This is one of the tools, by the way, that I didn't know I was doing at the time, is that instead of staying with the fear of what I was afraid of, I connected with a personal value of mine. A personal value of mine was learning and growing. And once I shifted my perspective to learning and growing from the experience, I got myself out of that inner critic cycle. And it caused me to recover enough that when he came back, gave me the water, I was able to answer all the questions. And as they say, I got my mojo back. I was resilient and recovered in the moment, luckily. And in that organization, I also had, advocates and mentors and sponsors that I'm sure that were working the system behind the scenes. So at the end of the day, cut a long story short, I ended up getting the interview. Ended up getting the job. Fast forward to the end of the week, I got the offer. However, that experience was a catalyst for me discovering what this inner critic was, and specifically how it manifested in the form of imposter syndrome. And so I thought to myself, getting this job is great, but I knew that if I wanted to continue to attain any other level of professional success beyond the point that I had already, I had to learn how to effectively tame the inner critic when it began to raise its ugly head. And so I embarked on my own research journey, like went and got coaching certification, began to coach other people. And that's how I began to really compile all the strategies, because I recognized, to your point on one of your questions, Dr. Lynette, how much this feeling can really hold us back from showing up as our most powerful selves. And if I hadn't recovered, it could have very possibly prevented me from getting that role, which literally changed the trajectory of my career. So I know that was a long answer, but handing back over to you, Dr. Lynette.
Thank you. And there's so much there. I have to tell you, and I'm just going to apologize, because I love the story, but when you arrived at the hamstring part, I was just chuckling, because that is so something that would happen to me, right? And that is one of the most painful feelings in the world. So you're already dry mouth and you're trying to hold it together, and then you have that type of pain, which often shows up on your face, even if you can't speak a word, right? So I'm just like, oh my gosh, I could not wait to hear how wonderfully the story turned out, because we all have a story that's similar to that. And there's this thing about imposter syndrome. There are some experts who are saying there's no such thing as imposter syndrome, and then there are experts who are saying that there is. What is your position on quote unquote imposter syndrome, Keisha?
And this is why I specifically use the word inner critic. And I explained in the beginning why the psychology, the neuroscience around why it shows up. It's literally our body going into fight or flight mode because we're being fearful. Could be fear of failure, fear of rejection, but it's some sort of fear of criticism. It's some sort of fear connected to not being able to do something that we don't have competency in yet. And I said it before, once you repeat and you build competency, eventually the fear goes away, it subsides. So inner critic is real. Imposter syndrome, feeling that you're not good enough or you're not smart enough and you don't belong despite evidence of high achievement, is specifically the subset of inner critic that we refer to as imposter syndrome. And it was a term that was developed in the 70s by two American psychologists, Himes and Clance, Pauline Clancy and Susan Imes. I think those are their first names. And so I believe that, yes, we all have, especially in high achieving organizations where everybody is doing well, sometimes you don't feel as if you're good enough, even though clearly you did something to earn your place there. In your head, you don't think you're good enough. That is true. That is a feeling that people have. We can't invalidate people's feeling. The question is, why are you feeling this way? And the way I differentiate it, so from the people that criticizing it, the criticism comes from actually when you experience microaggressions in business or in the workplace where people actually treat you like an imposter. I call it the imposter treatment. And there's a difference between feeling like an imposter, which I think most people do at some point in their life, and being treated like one. This is where you work in a workplace where you're being told, even though you're qualified for the job and you didn't earn your place here, we don't think you're good enough, even if you have a degree and the results to show for it. People in this position don't usually look like you, sound like you, or act like you. And so you feel like you're consistently having to prove yourself over and over. You have to work twice as hard to get the result, the respect that you need to get in the workplace. And so from that standpoint, I think recognizing that there's a difference between the feeling of not being enough and being treated as if you're not enough. And so when I work with organizations around this topic, I do talk about doing the internal work as an individual to build your confidence, but I don't abdicate the responsibilities from organizations and leaders to build inclusive cultures and workplaces where all talent thrives. It's not an either or, in my opinion, it's an and. I'm never going to say imposter syndrome isn't real because you feel, but the question is, why do you feel that way? Do you feel that way just because you were born that way? A lot of times it's not. sometimes it's because of how you're treated. And you walk away from a situation. It's like, well, I did everything that I was supposed to do, but yet my credibility and my experience are being devalued because it came in the package that looks like me and sounds like me. And that's where the disagreement is, and I'm totally aligned with it, because you don't want to put the burden on the actual people that are experiencing this level of oppression in the workplace or in business. You want to hold the system and the gatekeepers of the system accountable for creating environments where all their talent can thrive, regardless of background.
Imposter treatment. I love that, because there really is there's such an important distinction between what we're thinking in our head, what we're feeling that's not true, and how we're being treated. And people will try to convince us that that is not the way that we are being treated. But we know what we feel. We know what we're experiencing. We know what shade, as the young people say, we know what shade feels like when it's being done. And so I really love that. I had not considered, I really hadn't considered that phrase attachment until now. So I'm going to have to really chew on that later. Now, is this a good time, Keisha, to bring in, earlier you said you wanted to talk about some external things. Have you talked about that? Is there something specific that you want to bring to the conversation regarding externally that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I think that was what I just referred to, is how you are treated as a result of being treated as an imposter. So I'll tell this one story before, because we did talk about it, but I'll tell this one example where I went to an event, and it's interesting. This woman that I met, very brilliant young woman of color, and she was an attorney, and she remembered when she started her career as an attorney. I believe she was working somewhere in the city, and people just expected that she would, she wouldn't show up as powerfully as she did. She was, she is from the Caribbean and was raised in a culture where the majority of people looked like her, sounded like her. African American Black culture also tends to be very matriarchal. So that confidence was very nurtured in her from a young age. And so she didn't have this feeling. She was just like, I can do whatever I want to do because my parents, my culture raised me a way to believe in myself. So when she, stepped in the corporate world as a young, I would say 25-year-old or, somewhere in the 20s working in the corporate career, she showed up boldly and powerfully, and people were confused. The male leaders that were in their 40s and 50s, just like, you don't experience imposter syndrome. She's like, why? Like, no, I don't experience imposter syndrome. I can do anything I want to do because this was how I was raised. And she went on to tell me the consistent level of people just didn't take well in her showing up in her power. They expected her to shrink, play small, as so many women in that space did. And when she didn't do that, she experienced a lot of microaggressions. It's like you're angry, you are confrontational. I mean, these same abilities in lawyers, by the way, was, especially if you're a male lawyer, white male lawyer, it was seen as, you being powerful, you being competent, you being a strong leader. But for her, it was labeled in another way, literally displaying the same characteristics that others that were being rewarded for. But she was being told that she was not a team player and all the things. And at some point, she started feeling not good enough, not smart enough. Why? Because she was consistently treated as if she didn't belong, treated like an imposter. And that's a real example of this, what I was telling you before. Sometimes it's not like this internal feeling. It's basically a reaction to how you're being treated. That's the external thing that I refer to.
That was a great example. It was a great example because we started this conversation and I talked about how two sides to this. One, we talked about things that we were told as children, whether from our family, teachers. A lot of those words have taken root in us and led to this inner critic. And then we also talked about what others say about you that can lead to the inner critic. This was a third version, which is here's a person who was fed positivity and amazingness as a child. She walked into that company completely devoid of imposter syndrome, and just with the words and the microaggressions that were directed towards her, she developed an inner critic that she never had. And so that was just really such an amazing example. Now, before I go to the next question, I want to stop to see if anyone has questions that they would like to ask Keisha. Do you want to join the conversation? Do you have an example? Do you have a story? Now is the time that you can raise your hand, and I will bring you on stage to enjoy this conversation with us. As I go on to my next question, or actually before I do that, Keisha, one of the things that tends to happen when people are interviewed is we think of all kinds of things before the interview and during the interview that we want to ask. I want to give you some time to share some things that I haven't asked yet, whether it's a story, whether it's some tips, whatever it is that you tend to see happen often in your area of expertise. I just want to hand you an open floor to pour into us before I start asking questions that I have on my mind.
I love it. Yes, there are a couple of things that I love that you incorporated this. First of all, before I start answering, I want to echo what Dr. Lynette says. I'm a leadership executive coach, speaker, author. You have an opportunity to ask a question. If there's something that you're experiencing that you even want coaching on, this is your opportunity to do that. So I definitely want to reiterate the message from Dr. Lynette. So for me, one of the things I wanted to just double click on, I brought it up in the story of me getting into self-doubt and fear during the interview, which caused me to have dry mouth and panic and initially not do well on the interview. And I was able to recover because I connected to values. I said earlier on that people think that in order to be successful, you have to change who you are. But I believe that we need to actually become more of who we are in order to be successful. And part of becoming and embracing who we are is understanding what's really important to us and connecting to our why, connecting to our values. And so during the interview, I connected to this feeling of, I want to learn and grow. Even if I don't do well in this interview, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to learn and grow. Another value that you could have, this is another value I use. Interestingly enough, I love the fact that I'm not on video and I could be talking on audio because I'm naturally an introvert, which I can operate an extrovert. I can speak, I go on stages. But I do get exhausted from just being on the spotlight all the time. And so I always have to find a motivation to do what I'm doing that I would say goes against my natural innate tendency. And the very first time I stepped on the stage, and it was interesting, a big stage, I did well. Not because I was nervous as heck, But because I connected to a fundamental value of mine, I was just like, I'm not here to perform or to impress anyone. I just want, even if there's one person in the audience that I can instill enough confidence in, that they're going to walk out of this room feeling energized and be able to step up and play bigger at work. And that's going to change the trajectory of their lives. They're going to self-actualize. They're going to reach their full potential. That's why I'm here. And that value that I connected to is the value of contribution and service. And so when we learn how to tap into the things that are our natural motivators and our natural drivers, we will literally annihilate self-doubt and imposter syndrome and the inner critic in its tracks, because that thing is much more powerful than anything that you could be afraid of. And that thing is different for each of us. And so I have a guide that I can download. It's a values guide that I can share in the show notes whenever we're done having this conversation. It's like, how do you unveil the values and understand what those values are that's going to give you that energy to stay in consistent action, even when it feels hard, even when it's intimidating, because that purpose and that mission is much more powerful than anything that you could be afraid of. So that's how I would answer that question.
Okay, so Keisha and I both have extended the invitation to raise your hands and to come on stage with questions. Perfect. We have a question on the floor. Let's bring Ife up to the stage, and please feel free to unmute and to ask your question, or Keisha has generously offered to do on-the-spot coaching. Whatever that looks like for you, we are ready for you.
All right, thank you so much, y'all. And I just wanted to say thank you for even having this stage and this space. My question is this: how do entrepreneurs or people that are business owners counteract how they were raised in cultural differences to be able to craft their own authentic voice and be comfortable? And I'll kind of frame it from my personal experience. I'm first generation Nigerian American. Both my parents are Nigerian, and they valued kids being quiet. I've been able to start talking way more in the past few years, and they don't like that. So, and then also it's kind of a cultural difference, being that they've been raised in Nigeria, I've been raised in America. So my thing is, I celebrate my Nigerian heritage, but I also know that my parents aren't going to be my supporters because they can't fully understand what I'm doing or why I'm doing it. So how would somebody, and I think earlier in this room we were talking about cultural backgrounds as well. I was just being transparent in mine being Nigerian. How would one fight through their cultural and possibly how they were raised by their parents to be able to combat that, to be able to be an authentic voice and be pretty much be comfortable knowing that their business is going to be, they probably have to do things outside of how they were raised?
Such a really rich question, Ife. I love it. I actually talk about this a lot. In the beginning, I talk about the fact that I am an immigrant. I've lived here most of my life, but I'm originally from Jamaica. And one of the things in our culture, I think in a lot of Anglophone cultures, I don't know if this is the case in Nigeria, but you tell me if you've ever heard this from your parents. I struggled in my career initially to own my voice and to speak up, because one of the things I was being told when I was younger is that children are to be seen and not heard. So that means when somebody is in authority that's telling you to do something, then you don't speak up, you don't disagree. And interestingly enough, that is a cultural thing, but it could also be based on like a religious background or so many other things. I know friends that are Latinas that say in Spanish, calladita te ves más bonita, which means you look prettier when you're quiet. So there could be so many different things from so many different cultures that causes us to silence ourselves, to not to own our voice. And there is this tension that, yes, I want to self-actualize. I want to be successful in my career. I want to be successful as an entrepreneur. And I want to honor, but at the same time, I want to honor my career, my heritage, I should say. And it doesn't have to be either or. I do believe you can honor your parents by knowing that they did the best with you, with the information that they had. That's their culture. That is how they were raised. And you honor them because they did the best. However, you know that you, in order to be a successful entrepreneur in your space, you've got to have a perspective. You've got to own your voice. And so really, first of all, giving yourself permission not to dishonor and disrespect the culture you come from in any way, but you can honor it. It's like, you know what? Again, this is what my parents did because that's what they know how. But I have a different mission. I have a different mission in my life. I want to make an impact in my industry. I want to transform lives. I identify what the values, like I talked about. For me, it was contribution and service. I want to contribute rather than like making my family accept me and love me. They can love me for other reasons. But my mission is bigger than just my immediate family. I want to make an impact in my industry that's also going to impact the lives of so many other people. And so use that value as a driver to continue to do the work that is needed to begin to find your voice and to own your voice. And it is a journey, right? So when we talk specifically about owning our voices, right, we do have to do the work of putting some mental space between that narrative and really say, okay, what is my perspective? What's my standpoint? What are my drivers? What are my motivators? And you connect to that and to that purpose, and you use that as the thing that will help you. So how do you even do that from a communication standpoint? First of all, you give yourself permission to have a different perspective. You also allow yourself to do the work that's needed to develop, right? I don't know what your industry faces, music, entertainment, education, right? Is there a different perspective that you want to share with people in the world? Which means, are you doing up reading? Are you researching? Are you spending the time reflecting? Because a lot of times when you have your culture kind of forced on you, you don't have this independent thinking and you don't give yourself permission. And so sometimes you actually have to do the work to develop a perspective, because in order to share a perspective, you have to have one. So you might be beyond this, but I tell people all the time, it's like, give yourself permission to have perspective, then develop one. Do reading, do research, listen to everything that's happening in the current events, and then create time to reflect. And, you know, there's a lot of research that's being done now on how important it is for business leaders, including entrepreneurs, to not just be executing in their business, but to have white space to think and reflect. And through that reflection time, Ife, that's where you're going to develop your perspective, and then you're going to be able to communicate it. So I think it's 3 steps that I said. Honor your family, honor your tradition. Second, understand your why and your values and your motivations. That's going to help you to own your voice. Third, create the space for yourself to develop a perspective. And then fourth, reflect. So hopefully that helps. Did that help, Ife?
Oh, absolutely. And yes, I have been doing the work, and you read my bio briefly. But the 2 main things I focus on, my day job is in education, and then I am an entrepreneur. So it's entrepreneurship. So entertainment and entrepreneurship, being able to be an entrepreneur, but being able to document the process, being able to educate people who may want to be in my niche to be able to speed up the process. I've been involved in being an entertainment entrepreneur for 13 years, going on 14 years next year. So I would want to help people to be able to get where I'm starting to get now in quicker time than taking 13 years. So I have avenues to actually tell my story, monetize the story, but it's actually just getting active, using my social medias. I recently decided to become a content creator, and I just shared a post with the interview where the first IG video shared by me and my videographer made it to the Explore page of Instagram. So in a sense, we went viral on the first go round. So taking a formula or taking a format and then saying, hey, if you're a small business, if you're an influencer, or if you're a creative, it's not enough just to put out the art. Tell the story behind it. What are you about? What do you have going on? Because the more we see that we're all humans and we go through things, but we're still doing amazing things, the relatability factor is what makes people want to buy your product or be able to take advantage of your services. So this whole, finding your voice and saying, hey, I'm uniquely me. I still want to be connected to where I come from, but my parents aren't going to dictate to me where my career path goes or what my interests are. And respectfully, I love y'all parents, but y'all not going to tell me how to do my own thing called life. But I love y'all.
Yeah, love them, and give them the grace that they do the best they can with the information they know. And you have a different calling, you have a different mission in your life than they did, so they're going to have a different perspective. The other thing I'll add to that, as we were talking, I thought about this. As entrepreneurs, we really want our family to support us and to cheer us on and to be that the cheerleaders in the background. And the truth is, I know this is the case for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's not always going to be the case. Your parents are not going to necessarily be going onto your Instagram post and commenting and liking and resharing. And you know what? That's okay. That's not their purpose in your life. So you probably aren't doing this, so I'm going to talk to others that may be in this place. It's just like reset your expectations of those people. They love you for different reasons, and the support and the encouragement, build a community of like-minded people that are doing the kind of things that you're doing or have at least similar ambitions, and use them as a force, as your crew, to encourage you, to lift you up. And allow your parents to just be who they are, like your nurturers or whatever it is, so that you don't have the expectation on your family members, siblings, whomever it is, even spouses sometimes, that that's going to put a strain on the relationship. If they don't like your videos, if they don't share it, if they don't, they don't understand, it's okay. Take that expectation off so that you don't put a strain on relationship, and find a group of like-minded people that will support you along the way. That's the other piece that I wanted to add, because I see that comes up so much for entrepreneurs. So thank you, Ife.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I love the conversation. That was my one big question. So I'll just go ahead and move down to the audience. But thank you so much.
Awesome. You're welcome. Thanks for participating. I appreciate it. All right, Dr. Lynette.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Does anyone else have a question, a story to tell, an experience to share, desire some on-the-spot coaching? Thank you, Simone and Janae K, for coming and sharing some time with us today. We always appreciate your presence. Okay, well, while people are thinking about whether they want to raise their hand and join us on stage, I'm going to go to my next question. And one of the things that I would love to know is there something, is there one thing that you want everyone to remember when it comes to how they show up as their most powerful and effective self?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I said it in the beginning that don't change who you are, become more of who you are. And so the big thing I want people to be thinking about is we don't show up as our powerful selves because we don't understand what makes us powerful. What does that mean? We don't understand the unique value that we bring to the table. And see, a lot of times we spend time trying to get validation from others rather than learning to self-validate. Lisa Nichols, who was someone who worked with who coached me, she has this expression that she says all the time, and I love it. I always think about it. It's Like, if you don't like me, it is okay, because your like is just, icing on the cake. But I have the entire cake. I've done the internal work of self-love, of self-affirmation, to understand my worth, to know what I bring to the table, to understand what value I have. So I already have the whole cake. I love me. And so if you like me, that's nice. That's icing. But the icing is optional. It's not saying you don't want other people to be in your life, to pour into you, to love and to support you. But you can't use that as the foundation of your confidence. Because when it's not there, when that support is not there, then your confidence and your self-esteem and your self-worth goes away. And so that's why I'm always like, do the self-work. Validate yourself, affirm yourself, acknowledge yourself, celebrate your wins. We're always trying to improve. I work in the personal development space as a coach. I'm like, it's always one more thing. It's always that extra pound that we got to lose. It's always that extra revenue that we have to bring into our business. It's always that extra goal that we have to attain. But we don't spend enough time celebrating how far we have come. And so I think this is really key and really instrumental in the process of owning our value. And so really taking the time and the space to remember what is it, or to even know and explore what is the value that I bring to the table, right? One of the activities I give my clients, I say it all the time, is doing an informal 360 and asking people you've worked with, if you're a business owner, like some of your clients, if you're working in corporate, asking your peers, 5 to 10 people, send them a message and say, give me 5 words to describe my strengths. And when all the information comes back to you, you're going to find some themes. And then you're going to see the different value that you bring to the table, if you don't already know. One of the things I recognized when I worked in corporate, that I was invited into conversations with senior level executives for a few reasons. One, because I was a problem solver, I was innovative, I was creative, I was out of the box thinker. So if there was a problem, I would figure out a way to solve it. And maybe not in the standard way, but they love that because, okay, Keisha is going to come up with a solution. She's not just pointing out problems, she's going to come up with a solution. The other thing is that as an HR person, I had my ear to the ground in terms of understanding what the morale in the organization, understanding how people would react to certain different initiatives. Because I'm the kid, right? On the city bus at 11 years old, or on the plane at 12 years old, that like some random person's gonna come. I don't know, something about my face where people come as from a young age and they tell me their whole life story. And I realized that just that approachability and that willingness for people just to share. And so I use that as a strength. Like I realized that people didn't do that with everyone. People didn't create psychological safety that others felt like they could open up with them immediately. And because that was something that I naturally did when I worked in organizations, leaders would bring me and say, well, how do you think the organization would respond to this, Keisha? And usually I was right, because I spent a lot of time. People spend a lot of time just telling me stuff. And so it may, your strengths may not be the things that traditionally you would think of as strengths, but whatever it is, you can learn how to leverage them as really differentiators to make you stand out in entrepreneurship or in your career. You just have to know what those things are.
My question for you before we do that. If you could tell your 10-year-old self anything, what would you go back and tell your 10-year-old self that you feel would be the most powerful information you could share?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let me think for a second. What would I tell my 10-year-old self? Ooh. You're brilliant. You are creative. You have so much potential within you. Don't shrink. Don't hold yourself back. Step up, play big, and take all the risks. That's what I would tell myself, because if I did all those things, and I'm trying to do all those things, I really feel like our lives would be so much more fulfilling and limitless. And so I would just encourage myself to, take all the risks and play big. Those are the things I would say to me. You are enough.
I love that. And I love that it started with "you are brilliant," because it reminds me so much of why Intercultural Voices is here, because we want people to know their brilliance, to embody their brilliance, to have a place that you can share your brilliance without gatekeepers, without having to pay a fee to be on this stage. We know that your voice matters. We know that you have value.
I want to wrap up with what I started, and I've said a number of times, but because I want to drill it in, and then I end with a quote. I believe, as I said to you before, is that in order to be successful, we have to change who we are. We have to become more of who we are, and the work is to do that self-discovery, to understand all the beautiful parts of us that allows us to leave our special fingerprint here on this world. And so as we talk about self-doubt, fear, imposter syndrome, inner critic, all the things, it's oftentimes, when we experience these things, we walk away feeling some level of not enoughness. But Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So I will say, don't consent, my friends. Whatever they say, all I'm asking is don't consent.